Hey everyone, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to The Good Trouble Show. The stigma surrounding UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs, continues to melt away as former national security officials and government whistleblowers are coming forward to say, yes folks, these things are real and we need to take them seriously. The stigma is also melting away at the scientific and university level, and today we have a doctoral student to talk about her thoughts on UAP, science, and how the stigma is changing. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up buttons on YouTube, leave a comment, and let us know what you think about this episode. You can also find us on X at Good Trouble Show and everywhere else at The Good Trouble Show. You can also find us wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Search for The Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And as always, if you would like to chip in to help keep the lights on here, you can become a Patreon member of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. Sign up and you can support our work. Our guest today is part of a growing number in academia who are taking the UAP issue seriously. Here to discuss the UAP phenomena, please welcome from Binghamton University, PhD candidate in Anthropology, Maya Cowan. Maya, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How's I understand you're in the Northeast. How's the weather? Is it finally starting to feel like winter as opposed to summer?
It's feeling a little chilly, a little bit more like fall, but unfortunately I think it's supposed to start getting warm again for like another week. Maybe in November we'll have some luck with winter.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm definitely ready for fall. Here in LA, it got pretty hot over at my home. It was I think one day it got up to like 118. So I'm in like the hottest part of Los Angeles, of course. But yeah, no, I'm definitely ready. So firstly, welcome. We have spoken before, just kind of briefly. So tell me a bit about yourself and how long have you been interested in this whole UAP thing?
Yeah, for sure. So how long have I been interested in it is like really as long as I can remember. My grandfather was super into all of this sort of stuff, and I remember watching documentaries and things when I was a kid about it. He once told us we were related to aliens in some capacity. So it's definitely long been an interest. And then, of course, like everyone, I've been kind of following the news cycle about it since 2017 when those videos were released. And then I've been officially kind of studying it as my PhD topic, as in my supervisor gave me permission to switch topics.
And we're going to dig into that here in a bit in a little bit more detail. So you are, as you just mentioned, you're a PhD candidate in cultural anthropology at Binghamton University. What it's because obviously I did study this in college. What is cultural anthropology, and what made you decide to pursue the? I can't talk today. I'm all tongue-tied. What made you decide to pursue the topic?
So, basically, cultural anthropology, as distinguished from other kinds of anthropology, it's in the U.S. at least, anthropology is typically divided into 4 subfields. So archaeology, biological anthropology, which is stuff like studying, I don't know why I decided to use this hand where I can't actually use one of my fingers, but biological anthropology includes like forensic anthropology is probably the most famous example of biological anthropology that people be familiar with, but it also includes like primatology and the study of human ancestors. And then there is linguistic anthropology, which is probably the most related to cultural anthropology, where you study language and all of the sort of cultural meaning behind language. And then there's cultural anthropology, where the object of study is basically like human culture. So it's pretty broad, but that includes like religion, politics, gender, economics, really like all of these social systems that kind of come together to form what a culture is, although the discipline has undergone, I would say, a lot of revisions over the years. So in the early days, essentially an anthropologist would try to set out to study some sort of quote unquote exotic culture, a foreign culture, something that, isn't known to the West per se. And then they would go and try to study and figure out all of this stuff, like what are their kinship systems and what is their religion like and all this stuff, and then come back and basically write a book about that. But then that's not really how it's done anymore in our increasingly globalized world. So nowadays, anthropologists kind of choose a situation is the best way. Like that's how I describe it to my students, that they choose a situation to study. So, it might be migrant workers on American farms, or it could be divorce in Japan, or it could be UAP scientists.
Right. I love the last one. I'll take that over. I'll take that over divorce in Japan any day of the week. Now, did you do your undergraduate and your master's work? Sorry, go ahead. Say that again.
Oh, sorry. We were just talking about there's divorce in Japan. Somebody wrote an ethnography about it, and we were talking about that in my class yesterday. So that was what was on my mind.
Got it. Now, did you do your undergraduate and your master's work in anthropology as well?
Yeah, I did. My undergraduate is a bachelor's of arts in anthropology, and then my master's is it's actually, well, it's anthropology and cultural, social, and political thought. So it was kind of like an interdisciplinary program, but still cultural anthropology, just with a heavy theory component.
Got it. Okay, so essentially, anthropologists will look at a particular thing, such as divorce in Japan, but you chose to look into UAP as part of your doctoral work. Now, and again, I didn't even go to graduate school. Well, I went to graduate school for a hot minute, but as far as like working on your PhD, is there like a thesis as a PhD candidate? Like, how does that work? And is your thesis or whatever your research work is as a doctoral student, is that in UAP specifically?
Yeah, exactly. So there's a dissertation component, and I am supposed to finish mine by the end of this school year. We'll see if that happens. It might take an extra semester. But yeah, so that's where my research is for my dissertation. So
now, I'm curious, because one of the things I always find fascinating about this topic is like where the stigma is. And we know that there's still a lot of stigma, and we'll dig into that a little bit later. But I'm curious, because I remember when I was interviewing for grad school, when you were interviewing for this doctoral program, did you say, "Hey, I want to study UAP" as part of that application process?
no. So,
Why not? Or did you know at the time?
I certainly would have thought about it as something that was really interesting to study, but it didn't really even cross my mind, because my master's work was about community currencies, basically. I looked at a community currency on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. And then my master's advisor, knowing that I wanted to do a PhD, basically hooked me up, I guess you could say, with my current advisor, and said, like, well, you should go to Binghamton and study there. And because I was doing like economic anthropology kind of stuff, so it felt like a natural fit. And then my original PhD project was supposed to be looking at pension funds in Canada. So I was going to look at the Canada pension plan and talk about how like environmental, social governance factors are kind of bringing this new sort of moral economy into things. But then basically I started my program in 2019. So COVID messed up a lot of the plans that I originally had, as it did for a lot of graduate students in anthropology, and I'm sure in all disciplines. But then basically I was living back in Canada, and I was just so bored with it, and I had been trying and hadn't really been able to get the access that I needed for that project. And so I had this idea actually for years, where I was like, somebody should be doing an ethnography about all of this like really interesting science that's popped up and all this interesting government stuff. And then I thought, surely this is surely somebody is already
Doing it.
covering this ground and doing this work. And there are other anthropologists who are studying the same sort of thing. But eventually I just kind of thought, okay, I'm gonna look into whether this is kind of something that is possible. And so I talked to a few people and they said, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. And then I went to my supervisor and I said, you are going to think I'm crazy. Hear me out. Let me talk to you for like 15 minutes. Don't interrupt. This is what I'd like to change my topic to. And to my surprise, actually, he said yes. So I was allowed to switch.
Did he like ask a lot of questions? Like, why are you looking into this? Or like, was he truly shocked when you, because I'm sure he's heard it all, right?
Yeah, I remember because my pitch I started with, do you remember in 2017 when the New York Times released those videos? Because it's like, if anybody's heard about anything, it's going to be those. And he was like, yeah, I remember that. And then at the end of our conversation, he basically was like, oh, and by the way, I watched a YouTube video about those videos that was a very careful, debunking, and it turns out that they were whatever. And I'm sure he was talking about something that Nick West released.
Of course. Yeah, the seagull or a balloon or whatever, whatever his excuse of the weekend.
Okay. I was like, well, it still doesn't matter even if you don't think that they're real, because, as long as you're letting me go off into the world.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm curious, how did your parents feel about it? Well, did you say it was your dad or your granddad said that, or was really kind of into this whole?
My granddad. I'm not really sure what my parents think about it, to be perfectly honest, but they're supportive.
Good.
I told my mom that we don't call them UFOs anymore. We call them UAPs. And she was like, why? And as jokingly, I told her because it's PC. And then she's been going around telling everyone the PC term is UAP.
Oh my God, that's funny. The politically correct term. Yeah, it's funny. Even to this day, it's hard for me to remember to call them UAPs. I always go back to the whole UFO thing. So how does the UAP phenomenon relate to anthropology?
I think a number of different ways, because one of the things that we, I think, know about the phenomenon, or at least like at this point, I think it should be taken for granted as a fact, is that these experiences happen all over the world throughout different cultures. There are different explanations sometimes, but there's some sort of phenomenon that seems to be, persistent throughout time and throughout culture. And so really, like, there are almost like an infinite number of anthropological ways that you could go about studying this topic. You could go just about anywhere in the world and study the topic. I know that, for instance, there's another anthropologist who's studying UAP in Japan. But not divorce.
Okay, good. Just checking he wasn't like double dipping in his anthropological research.
Right. So that's one thing, is you could just go as an anthropologist and look at people's experiences and look at groups of people who have experiences or support people with experiences and kind of see what the culture is around that, what the situation is there. Or you could go into the halls of Congress. I doubt they would let you, but it would be a good project if you wanted to go into like a government setting and look at how different government actors are relating to it. So there's this political aspect to UAP. You could look at the economics of UAP and how people are making money off of it or not making money off of it, as the case may be. Or, you could do what I've been doing and look at the kind of culture of academic research that's been springing up around it. So I think it intersects with anthropology pretty much every level, because it's such an interesting topic that it permeates so many different levels and areas of society.
Now, anthropology, is it considered a science, like a hard science? What exactly is it?
So it's a social science. So it exists in kind of a weird space between like the humanities and the hard sciences. But some anthropology is hard science. So, for instance, somebody I know just got a grant to study like the effects of the flight or flight or fight response on like bone development or metabolism or something like that. So there's like definitely, some really hard scientists. I have a geneticist on my PhD committee, for example, but then I don't think anthropology, like social anthropology, is a hard science. And there's certainly like kind of a sorted history there as far as like trying to use anthropology as a science to justify really racist and sexist attitudes that existed in society. And so anthropology has done a lot of work to try to get itself away from that. But I would say, like, as an anthropologist, what I think of my job as far as doing ethnography is to talk to people, figure out what's going on, figure out what people think, and to sort of synthesize that in a way that is legible to the people who I'm talking to and talking about. So it makes sense to them what I'm kind of appraising the situation to be, but it also makes sense to other anthropologists and has kind of a grounding in anthropological theory in some way.
Now, does anthropology as a social science, does it use the scientific method?
Not sociocultural anthropology. No, we have our main research method in sociocultural anthropology is what's called ethnography. So it basically is like literally creating the picture of a culture, and so there's kind of two main components to that. So one is participant observation, which is the idea that you go out into the field and like actually hang out with people and kind of just figure out what it's all about for them, what are their daily practices actually like, to do a little bit yourself, ideally, if you can, to get a sense of what it is to be a part of a particular culture. And then the other part of it is usually formal interviews. And so that can, there's other things that sometimes people use surveys and things like that, but I do conversational interviewing, which is basically just sitting down for a conversation with someone and kind of directing the flow into the different topics that I want to cover.
So what are the exact topics that you are covering for your doctorate in regards to UAP?
So the research questions that I kind of have vaguely are like, how do scientists kind of think about skepticism in this field? And I mean that in a multitude of senses, because there's obviously the scientific skeptical movement has a pretty big problem with UAP studies in general and kind of thinks that it's not worth doing. And then, so part of it is like, I'm curious about how people engage with that movement as scientists within the sort of UAP studies community. And then I'm also curious how they incorporate like actual skepticism and the scientific method into their research, because they do. And, there's this misconception that they don't. And then I'm also interested in what motivates people to pursue this field, especially often at great professional, if not even personal stigma, because there is still a ton of stigma, especially in the hard sciences. Anthropology, I haven't really had much pushback actually, but there certainly is a lot of pushback in some disciplines. And so that's become kind of one of my research questions is like, what really like inspires people to pursue this field? And then also, how is evidence sort of dealt with in a scientific way within this field? And that's a question that I still feel like I'm trying to, I feel like I have a bit of a handle on the first two at this point, but the third question about like, I'm still kind of theorizing that one through, but
essentially what you're saying is like you're still seeing in the mainstream sciences a good deal of skepticism or stigma, as opposed to the social sciences seems to be much more open to this whole idea.
yeah, in general, for sure. And there was a study that was just done. I think the author's last name was Yingling, and I haven't like really thoroughly dug into it, but I read the results or like their findings about it, and it seems, yeah, that pretty universally faculty members in the harder sciences, and probably the harder the hard science you go, the more that this is the case, that there's still a ton of stigma. As far as the social sciences go, I can't really speak for other social sciences, but sociocultural anthropology is pretty open to the idea, I think. Like, I had a committee of 3 sociocultural anthropologists, and all of them were on board with me switching my topic to this. And then I also had a biological anthropologist join my committee as well, and that's been very valuable because he kind of can offer a little bit more of the hard sciences perspective to what I'm doing. Yeah, it like the most stigma-y thing I think that somebody told me is, I said that I was studying this, and she said, so do you have to like pretend that you think the world is flat when you talk to these people? And I was
Wow.
like, oh, I don't think I have to tell a bunch of, tenured physics professors that the world is round, but
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I'm curious too, and this is something that I have pondered myself on the air, sort of talk to our audience about it. But the thing I would love to know, and maybe this could be part of your doctoral research, is you were talking about like why people are interested in pursuing this topic, or when there is frankly a lot of risk. There's stigma, ridicule, all of that kind of thing. But like someone that's like really into the topic, like really is like myself. I mean, I'm very much into it. I can understand like if somebody's into something, you're going to spend a lot of time in it. Like if you believe in something, I don't know, be it the Earth is flat, or you're into underwater basket weaving, or UAPs, you're naturally going to spend a lot of time pursuing it, or to some varying degree, because it's a subject of interest. It's a subject that you believe is important, or whatnot. But what I've always asked and sort of just posited it is why do the debunkers, and when I say debunkers, I don't mean skeptics, I mean like the Mick Wests of the world, or Jason Colavito, all of those folks, why a good anthropological question is, why do they spend so much time on a topic that they do not believe in? And like kind of the analogy I use is, it's like if Maya, you said, you know what, Matt, Chewbacca is real. He's not there was a real Chewbacca on Star Wars. He's not a guy in a costume. He is really he's really a Wookiee. Wookiees are real, or whatnot. And let's just say that was part of your doctoral work. I would say, you know what, Maya, knock yourself out. If you believe Chewbacca is real, go for it. Have fun. I hope you find what you're looking for. I'm going to go hang out with my friends at the bar, go see a movie or something. The last thing I would do is spend almost 24/7, at least 12 hours a day, it seems, with some of these folks, tweeting about it, writing about it, and whatnot. So I'm just I have my own theories. In my opinion, I think some of them are on someone's payroll, but it's just an interesting question. It's like you can understand why someone would spend a lot of time on something that they believe in and they think is important and they think is real, versus people that don't believe it at all. They think it's a bunch of hogwash or birds or whatever. Why they would spend so much time on something? It's really an interesting question. Do you have any theories?
Yeah, my wheels are definitely turning there. I don't know if I have any theories. Well, actually, so first thing, this is great advice that my supervisor always tells me, which is that anthropologists are not asking as interesting of anthropological questions as their participants. And so you always need to be attuned to what people are actually thinking about. So you're right. I am going to look into this as best I can. I once tweeted an invitation to Mick West to participate in an interview, but he did not respond to me. But actually, maybe now I'll spend more time pursuing that, because it is very curious to me. But I guess the best guess that I have is that they really, I think, believe that they're doing something really good by the debunking. Like, I think they think that everyone who believes in UAP is either a charlatan or being fooled by a charlatan. And so they're actually doing some sort of service to the world and to the community by like saving us from our misguided beliefs. I think that's genuinely it.
So in anthropology, when you're talking about stuff that is taboo or stigmatized, what are the sources of that? Like, how does that come into play? And because I've always found it fascinating, the stigma surrounding UAP, how it is sort of, increased and then waned. I would like to think that the stigma is slowly decreasing, but speak a bit about like stigma itself, how it comes about, what propagates it, what sort of determines its sort of lifespan, especially like in terms of like UAP, that kind of thing. If I'm probably not asking the question quite well, but maybe you get what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think so. So I think of stigma and taboo as different things, and probably that's because there is kind of like an anthropological concept of taboo as a very specific thing, as basically something within a culture. I guess I think of taboo as the thing of it, and stigma as kind of the social mechanism of it. So taboo is certainly, and honestly, I feel like I have tried to look into this, and I don't think people are like really writing about taboo in anthropology anymore, thinking about it as much as they perhaps used to in the past. And it's something that I keep meaning to like dig into, is more of the actual anthropology that's been done about taboo and theorizing about taboo, because it is something that exists in every culture. Typically, we think of or it's something I've certainly heard said a lot and seen in anthropology textbooks, that the only universal taboo is basically incest, which makes sense as a universal taboo.
Of course.
But then, there's all sorts of things that are taboo in some places that are totally fine in others. And UAP would be one of those things that it's just like, but the actual taboo is like, basically it's something that it's such a fundamental cultural thing to be just totally verboten. Like, everyone knows you don't talk about it. Like, it doesn't need to be said that it's verboten. Everyone in the culture just kind of knows that. And there are social consequences for breaking that taboo. So I'll just give one example that I believe is from the Yanomami people, which is a taboo against saying the names of dead people. And so there was an anthropologist who went to that culture, infamously, I will say, and he was basically trying to build this like genealogy, this kinship chart. And so he was basically kind of like bribing some people to break this taboo and say dead people's names so that he could build his genealogical map. And there were social consequences for the people, as it turned out, who were breaking this taboo and talking to him about this. And, people were really upset. And so, yeah, like that's the kind of level of thing that we're talking about. Like somebody could be ostracized for talking about it. And I do think that UAP kind of is that, and it kind of in some circles, maybe in a way that it used to be, that has kind of drawn back a little bit. And I think my theory is just post 2017 with the New York Times article, there's something very official. Like most people believe reporting when it's done in the New York Times. And so by being able to point to something official and say, look, the government said, here are these videos, they came from the government, the New York Times authenticated them, and then later the Pentagon admitted that they were real. And being able to point to that, I think just in our ontological framework as like American society, let's say North American society, it gives it more of a legitimacy because our ontological framework in general, and there are many different, I'm always saying this, there are many different ontologies that exist within North America and many different frameworks. But for this kind of, the kind of general framework is for our ontology very much comes out of like sort of the Enlightenment and scientific thinking. And often, when something isn't scientific, it gets lumped in as pseudoscience. And then if you believe that, there's like this stigma that maybe you believe all sorts of other unscientific things. If you believe in this conspiracy theory, maybe you believe in all sorts of other crazy conspiracy theories that are even more taboo. And so I believe that after 2017, it gave a lot of people kind of an in to be out about their interests, because it's like, look, I can point to this thing and it's a fact. And, you can dispute is in the videos, but you can't dispute that pilots are whistleblowers, pilots are coming out, people from the Navy in general, whistleblowers are saying this is real. There's something there, we're seeing it. And so, that certainly holds a lot more weight for, I think, most people in American society.
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Yeah, I've often wondered, like, especially with like the skepticism and the debunking is one of the goals of that, the people that do that, is their real goal, even if they like think they're saving the world or they're saving ourselves from ourselves, is the real goal of in them messaging on this, is their real goal to propagate stigma such that, if like shame, let's take shame. Like shame is like one of the earliest, I think, sort of emotions that we're taught as a young child. You do something wrong, shame on you, and you made a mess in your bedroom, shame on you, or you threw food across the kitchen floor, shame on you, and you this feeling of shame. You're really taught from a very young age to do anything to avoid it. You never want to be ashamed. Therefore, you behave in such a way that would not be shameful, right? So I've often wondered with the debunking and the true amount of energy that they put into it. Is that the goal? Is it shame? Is it to make you feel ashamed that you're asking these questions? Are they trying to make you feel ashamed that you think that this might be real, in order to affect, I guess, in a way, a sort of internal taboo? It's like, you know what? I feel ashamed for asking this. I feel stupid. If I'm a member of Congress, I feel ashamed or that I'm being silly for asking about these things, and I don't want to feel ashamed, so I'm not going to pursue it. I don't know. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't know that it's necessarily always the primary goal, but I think it's like certainly that's got to be part of it, right? Is that in some by enacting the stigma, you are essentially you're calling attention to the taboo that somebody's broken, and often the social consequence for that would be shame.
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's definitely hard to. I mean, it's always hard to sort of figure out people's motivations. That is for sure.
Yeah.
So again, moving on, sort of like with your educational journey, have you attended any of the academic oriented conferences such as Seoul, SCU, things that? Well, actually, I think those are really kind of the only science or academic based ones. Have you been to any of these?
Yeah, I went to both. I went to the Soul Foundation last year. I went to SCU in person in Alabama this year, and last year the conference was online. But that was actually the first academic conference that I had attended. And then I went to the Galileo Project second annual conference, and then just this fall or this summer, I guess it was this summer. I think it was maybe 2 months ago to the day. Anyway, I did a talk at the Society for UAP Studies conference as well, which was online. I
Awesome.
think that's it as far as the conferences I've been to. I try to go to as many as I can because I feel like that is, kind of like that's like my field site for my research in a way is academic conferences where people are getting together and actually exchanging these ideas and sharing like the updates about like how are people thinking about this, how are they thinking about it maybe a little bit differently than they were last year or a couple of years before, comparing notes, that kind of stuff.
And how has this helped your academic work, attending these conferences?
um Mostly just like being able to meet people who then become research participants who I can interview. I guess.
Uh,
Probably like kind of similar to how your job works, I would imagine.
sure. And I would think that all of these folks would be really excited for the fact that you are pursuing this academically. I mean, there aren't a lot of people that are doing that.
Yeah, I definitely it's nice to hear people think that you're doing something actually academically important in some way when that's not necessarily, I will say even in anthropology, like although most people aren't like, you know, like most people aren't telling me don't pursue this or something like that. It's not that kind of stigma, but there is kind of like a general feeling I've had from some of my other peers that it's kind of like a blow off project in some way, but I don't think about it that way at all. I mean, it's a lot of fun. My supervisor always keeps telling me I'm not allowed to tell the other grad students how much fun I have doing my research because
Well, and that actually was my next question is like in your kind of generation, your age group, what is the general view of the whole UAP phenomenon if you were to make a generalization about it versus say like my age group, I'm 25, no I'm joking, but like an older age group that may be more skeptical of this sort of thing. What would you say overall is your generation's view on non-human intelligence, that it may be here, all of that kind of thing?
that is such a good question. I feel like I'm so out of touch with my generation on this because most of my friends are older than me for various reasons, just because of like I guess, the being in grad school and the career I've done before this and during this. But of my friends, like that are my age, I think people in general are like somewhat indifferent to it. There's definitely not as much stigma. But then it's hard for me to also, because I've been interested in this my whole life. Like when I talk to my best friend who has been my best friend since we were in grade two, she's like she knows that I am interested in this topic. So it's no surprise to her that when I tell her about this kind of thing. I think actually everyone really that I grew up with, I think for some reason kind of knows that I was interested in this topic. But in general, yeah, I don't see too much of a negative reaction to it. I will say yesterday, so my supervisor is away right now on a field trip, and so I have been in charge of the intro to sociocultural anthropology class. And so yesterday I was telling the students about my research, and most of them are like, I would say in the age range of probably like 18 to 21 or whatever. Like they kind of run the spectrum for undergrads. And like, I would say, okay, so first of all, we were like discussing the actual material that needed to be discussed, but then my supervisor wanted me to tell them about my research. And I could definitely tell that they were a lot more engaged when I was just telling them about like my research and kind of giving them the background on like, so this is what's been going on, because most of them would have been kids, right? When
Sure.
this New York Times article came out, so I would imagine that they've kind of all, at least in some way, it's been in the media in a real way periodically throughout most of the time that they've probably been paying attention to the media. But then out of the class of like 40 students, only one of them had watched the hearings from last year, the congressional hearings, which I was like, you guys all, like, what are you doing? You need to go home and Google these hearings.
All right.
But there was a lot of them that I think were like super engaged and really, really interested in it. And then there was like a couple of students who I could tell were giving me like the serious side eye.
Like, what are you studying? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I can imagine. I'm sure they think it's like underwater basket weaving or pottery or something like that. But
Yeah, or just that it's crazy, because I was also talking about the stigma and how the stigma is different depending on the culture. Actually,
right.
we're reading a short story called UFO over Kushiro, and it's about it's about a couple that is getting divorced in Japan, which is where the divorced in Japan stuff came from.
That keeps coming up. I hear it's a thing there.
Exactly. But then in the story, somebody sees a UFO, and I asked them what they thought about that, and one student said, well, maybe she didn't see a UFO, maybe she thought she saw a UFO, or she was using and I was like, did anybody else notice how nobody in this story questioned whether the woman had seen a UFO? Like it's very different cultural context, because
Right.
if this were a short story about a UFO set in the US, it would be realistic to have at least one of these characters to be like, oh, so she had a screw loose then, or something like that, because it is more cultural taboo here than it is in other places.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so Maya, what are your plans following graduation, and do they include anything related to UAP?
That is a very good question. I would hope to keep going in academia, but that feels like a pipe dream, honestly, because there's just like so few academic jobs and they're incredibly competitive. So we'll see. I'm not super worried about it. I'll either find a job and stay in America, or I guess I have to move back to Canada and, I don't know, work for the government or something.
I don't know if you want to stay in the U.S., especially with the craziness of the election. That's for sure. So, but
Yeah, I guess reevaluate after November.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart. Well, I have to say, I am just so impressed with the fact that you have chosen to pursue this, and I hope that I don't hope, I know you're going to be a trailblazer for other students, be it undergraduate, graduate, doctoral, to pursue this. It is definitely, I think, it has to be just one of the most fascinating subjects to study academically, and there certainly is no shortage of material, research, people. I mean, because it is, in my mind, or in my opinion, this is definitely going to be a very important topic moving forward, and more important as more people come forward, especially national security officials. Of course, we have the hearing in the House regarding UAP. So I would say that you're definitely a trailblazer.
Well, I thank you. I will say if anybody wants to pursue UAP studies, please reach out to me. Even if like you think that what I'm doing is really interesting, my supervisor has said that he's come around. He's said that he would supervise other students who want to work on the same topic. So uh, yeah, if you want to come to Binghamton and study anthropology,
Awesome. Well, and we'll post the links to on how to find you on the YouTube description. But if you want to just tell everyone here, what is the best way to follow your work and reach out if you're a student and you want to study UAP, either be it in anthropology or some other method.
yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn by searching my name on LinkedIn, or I am also on the app formerly known as Twitter, and my handle I think is just UAP Maya. Um, yeah, I'm just gonna
Great.
like double check that, so because I think I changed it.
Yeah, I half the time I can't remember half of the handles. Some of mine are Good Trouble Show or The Good Trouble Show. I had to leave it at Good Trouble Show on Twitter, or what's called now, or which as you mentioned is called X. I keep calling it Twitter, but yeah. So yeah, please
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. So it is UAP Maya. So feel free to reach out on there
Awesome.
if you want to study.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, congratulations on your academic work. I look forward to hopefully meeting you one day in person at one of these conferences. And we certainly wish you well and are excited for what the future holds for you.
Thank you. It was lovely getting to chat for a little bit of a longer time.
Absolutely. All right. Maya Cowan, ladies and gentlemen.